Ba-da-da-dum. Hey, welcome back. It's the final hour now of Sunday Morning Easy for this 27th of August. Good morning again. Orv Graham speaking. Thank you very much for joining us for our music and information on Sunday Morning Easy. And this is an interesting hour for me this hour. Next half hour, have an author with me. You know, I speak to a lot of authors. In fact, I've spoken to this one twice in the past. But this is different today because he's right here in the studio. His name is Christopher Kelly. Chris has written this book called America Invaded, which is a fascinating book that I think you're going to find interesting. And I think you'll find Chris Kelly to be even more interested. When I first spoke to you, Chris, you phoned me by prearrangement. And I said, Chris, where are you as we speak? And you said, well, I just got off the plane. I'm in London. Pull that microphone a little closer to you, if you would.
Yeah, great to be with you this morning, Orv.
Yes, well, thank you.
I called you from London after a long flight from Seattle. I have a son. My youngest son goes to the American school in London as a senior in high school there, about to graduate. And so we were flying back from Seattle to London for him to get back to school.
And then the next time I talked to you, you phoned me again, and you were in
Florence,
Italy.
That's right. Yes, I think that was Memorial Day.
Was it?
Right? Yeah. And I just gone to a Memorial Day service in the Florence American Cemetery. As I think I remember talking to you then. But it's great to be here in Illinois and the land of Lincoln. It's great to be here. Yeah.
It's good to have you here. Now, you mentioned Memorial Day. Memorial Day is an honoring servicemen.
Sure.
War is what we're talking about.
Right.
And that's the topic of your book.
Yes. We wrote an earlier book. Me and my co-author, his name is Stuart Laycock. He's English. He'd written quite a bit about Roman Britain. He's written a lot of books about British military involvement around the world. He wrote a book called All the Countries We've Invaded. Together we wrote America Invades, which looked at American military involvement around the world. And we had a chapter on every country from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. But the one country we left out was the United States of America itself.
So you wrote this book.
Exactly.
To fill that. Let me read a little bit of the desk cover on this book. It says, have you ever wondered why some towns in Texas have French names? Or why there's a statue of a Shawnee chief at the U.S. Naval Academy? Or what coastal wildlife refuges have to do with American fears of invasion? And what the olive oil riot of Montana was really all about. America Invaded has the answers to these kinds of questions and many more. Tell me about that olive oil riot in Montana.
It's funny. The olive oil riot took place in Missoula, Montana. And shortly after Pearl Harbor, there was an Italian cruise ship that was in Panamanian waters. And right after Pearl Harbor, Italy declared war on the United States. And this cruise ship was seized by the American government. And the crew, and there were about 1,000 Italian sailors and officers on board, and they were sent up by train up to Missoula, Montana. And they were detained for the duration of the war. And so this was a ship called the Conte Biancamano. And so the olive oil riot, I was looking for, in this book, for incidents of fighting on American soil, fighting in all of our 50 states. So, of course, I was looking for a story in Montana. Well, I found this olive oil riot story. What happened is that the Americans explained to the Italian chef that he had to use beef fat rather than olive oil.
Really?
And the Italians don't like that very much. He didn't like that idea very much. And so that's what caused the riot. And I think there were some punches that were thrown, some fists were thrown around at this time. But the worst injury that happened was one American guard somehow managed to shoot himself in the foot in the course of the olive oil riot. So that was the olive oil riot.
You know, this book, it's divided by states.
Right.
Every state in the United States is represented.
State. Plus, we also added Washington, D.C. because, of course, the British burnt the White House.
Sure.
So we had to fit that into, and that was interesting, too.
So you separate it by state, and
Right.
and it's all alphabetical. And I've just turned to page number. I don't see the page number. It doesn't matter. 107, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, 108. Illinois.
Right. Sure.
We don't think about Illinois being invaded, but your text tells us about it. This is a textbook.
Well, we hope it's more entertaining than most textbooks.
Yeah,
but I mean, Illinois, we talk about things like Cahokia, which
Sure.
I have never been to. You probably, and
You're
many of
not
your listeners
you're
have
not
been
far from it right now.
there. Not far now. Yes, I mean, so you obviously had Native Americans in what is today Illinois,
Yeah.
and then you had the arrival of the first Europeans coming. The French, the Spanish, even coming up nearby, and of course the English and the Americans. So you had all of these kind of waves of invasion that shaped Illinois and shaped different states as well.
The Trail of Tears.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Sure,
Wow.
sure.
Now, you spent the night last night in Decatur,
I did, yes.
and amongst other things, you found the statue of Stephen Decatur.
I did. Our country, right or wrong. That's right.
Yeah.
I was delighted to pay a visit to the statue of Stephen Decatur, Commodore of the U.S. Navy, who fought against the Barbary pirates in the Jefferson administration,
Now-
and then who famously said, "My country, right or wrong." There was a ship that was named the USS Decatur, which was in my adopted home state of Washington, that was involved later in fighting what was called the Battle of Seattle. So there's even a connection between Decatur and my hometown of Seattle as well.
Wow. So your hometown is Seattle, and right now you're on a tour of the United. I've been getting updates from your office virtually every day. It says Chris is in Montana signing books. Chris is in Wyoming. Chris is in
right.
Nebraska.
That's right.
And today you're going to be in Peoria.
That's right. We're going to be in for one day only. We're in Peoria at a bookstore called I Know You Like a Book. And a great name for a bookstore. It's in Peoria Heights, I believe, and it will be from 2 to 4 p.m. today.
2 to 4. You sign the books.
Sure.
I have a book. Hey, by the way, you came walking in with some gifts for me. Thank you. Thank you very much. What's this that says 1914 on?
Oh, this is a
It's
deck
a
of cards.
deck of cards.
Yeah, and those were made to help promote an earlier book, which is a memoir about my great grandfather, and it's called An Adventure in 1914. But we had the cards done by a trading company that makes them for the casinos, and then instead of putting on the regular like king and queen, we put on, for instance, the Queen of Hearts is Matahari in this deck of cards, and we have people from like George V from World War I. People from that time are on the deck as well.
You must be a real student of history.
I've always loved history. It's been a lifelong passion for me. Yes,
You were a broadcaster.
I was in the broadcast business for about 20 years in television in Sacramento and Seattle on the West Coast. Yes.
Not in radio.
Well, we were involved. My family was involved in the radio business prior to. We started out in the radio business in Sacramento, going back to 1945 with KCRA AM in Sacramento, California. So my grandfather put that station on the air, many years ago. So yes.
And your role as a broadcaster, were you?
I wore a lot of hats. I was in sales, in marketing, research director, program director, marketing director, and on the board of the station. So I did a lot of different things, and then I exited the business in the late 90s, and I've kind of been semi-retired, but always had this interest in military history. And I'm not I'm not an academic historian. I'm not a professor, but I wrote a review of this Stu Laycock's book about called All the Countries We've Invaded, and then we met in a pub in London and started writing together. And now this is the fourth book we've done so far.
The two of you working together. Now,
Sure.
was that Stu that was here taking a picture a moment ago?
No, Stu is in the UK. This is another friend. This is my friend. He will be at the signing. His name is Major Jack Coughlin, and he was a pilot. He's a U.S. Air Force pilot during Vietnam. He flew C-130s during the Vietnam War. He was also a source for me when I wrote the America Invades book, when I was writing about chapters like Vietnam and Southeast Asia. So, there's nothing better than, as you know, interviewing, talking to the source directly to get, stuff that is not, you can't find in other books or on the internet.
This book and the other books that you have written have required in-depth research.
Yes, we did a lot of research, a lot of travel. There's a great deal of you'll find a lot of photography in the books. There are maps of every state, of course, and also there's tourist information too. I think of the book a little bit as a road book, a book that you don't have to read it from cover to cover. You can dip in, like you dipped into Illinois. You can go to the states that you care about, or maybe the states you're going to travel to and want to explore.
Yeah, you're going to be in Minnesota next week. You can take a look at the invasions in Minnesota. Tell me about those. That would be Indians, I would bet.
Yes. Well, there's also a stone there. The what is it called? There's a rune stone in Minnesota, which I had never heard about until we were doing this book. But it's called the Kensington Rune Stone. And I don't know if you've ever heard about that or not.
No, I have not.
And it might, this is something that might be true and it might be a hoax. And I can't tell you which way it is, but I can tell you that in Kensington, Minnesota, they have this stone that's carved with Viking runes. And the question is, did the Vikings arrive in Minnesota or not? And, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But the one thing that's indisputable is that this had an impact on the naming the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, whether that's a hoax or not, that's why the Vikings are the Vikings, is because of this darn rune stone that they had.
Tell you what, you were in broadcasting.
Sure.
And you did sales, so you're familiar with commercials. I'm going to put you to work. Read a commercial for me for Richland Community College.
Okay. Count on Richland Community College to be your resource for fitness, facilities, and food. Get fit in our newly remodeled fitness center and get personalized workouts from your personal trainer. Host your next meeting here. We have space for over 200 people and offer free Wi-Fi and technical equipment. Book a speaker through Richland Speakers Bureau. We have experts who can speak to your group about all sorts of topics, all for free. Have an amazing meal at Bistro 537, our culinary student-run restaurant located right here on campus. Richland is here for the community. Richland.edu.
Yeah, good work. Good work. Do we have to pay you a fee for reading a commercial? I've got another one for you in a minute. You're going to read another one for me, okay?
Awesome.
In a minute for the Millikan Decatur Symphony Orchestra. It's 17 minutes now past 11 o'clock in the morning. Good morning. This is Sunday Morning Easy, and my guest is Christopher Kelly. Chris Kelly, who is the co-author of the book America Invaded, a state-by-state guide to fighting on American soil. And no state escapes.
Right. I mean, there have been invasions of every state. I mean, and to take one example is like there's a difference between, say, Alaska and New York. They're totally different states, geographically, climatically, and all that. But they're also different in terms of their history and specifically in the way that they've invaded. Alaska was invaded by the Russians and colonized by the Russians, and we didn't buy them till 1867. So, like today, if you talk to indigenous Alaskans, the native people there, most of them are Christian, but they're neither Protestant nor Catholic. They're actually Orthodox, which is a legacy of this Russian invasion. New York, on the other hand, is a state that was invaded and colonized by the Dutch, and that was more of a commercial or transactional invasion. I mean, they bought Manhattan from the Indians.
$27.
Yes. And the funny thing is that the Indians that sold it to them were not the Indians that actually lived on Manhattan. So it was a little bit like would you like to buy the Brooklyn Bridge? Sure. Yeah. So the Indians were clever. I mean, so
outstanding.
So yeah.
Now this is a hardcover book.
It is. We'd like to come out with a paperback at some point, but it's hardback. It's a heavier book because you had to use a nice stock, glossy stock to put glossy photographs on as well.
Yeah, the pictures. Yeah, it is a heavy book.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
I noticed that instantly. I said, wait a minute, what makes this so heavy? And then I looked through it. All the pictures, all the photographs. Yeah.
Sure.
And the history in this. Wow.
Right. Then the Dutch in what became New Amsterdam I mean, they built famous. I mean, everybody talks now about building a wall. Well, the Dutch built a wall, and they built a wall in Lower Manhattan, and it's that wall that became known as Wall Street. And why were they building a wall? Because they were afraid of being invaded themselves. They were afraid of an invasion from Connecticut by the British. Now, it didn't quite work out. The British did take over New Amsterdam, and New Amsterdam became New York. But there's a connection between Wall Street and these invasions.
I don't think the history books that I read told me that. I didn't know that.
Sure.
Does anybody know that? Most people do not know that.
Well, I mean, I kind of love these, these interesting anecdotal factoids, and yeah. I try to provide the book with a wealth of those kind of details that maybe you haven't found in textbooks. Maybe you think that history is a boring, dry subject you took in class, but we try to make history that's entertaining and relevant to what's going on today as well.
And it's all in the book.
Yep, you bet.
It's in the book. Can we give away one of these books later this morning?
Please, that'd be
Would
great.
you sign it?
Happy to do it, sure.
Good. I'm going to count on you signing it, and we're going to give it after 11:30. We're going to give it to a caller after 11:30. In the meantime, go back to work for me. Read a commercial.
Okay. Did you know that part of the melody in some of the Beatles' music is based on classical music? It's true. Just as some of the lyrics in popular music are based on lines from the Bible, many popular music melodies come from the works of the masters, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Shostakovich, and on and on. The basic melody line in many popular songs recorded by the Beatles, Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Crosby, Elvis, and many others, are the same melody lines that you often hear in symphony music. Part of the fun of going to the Millikan Decatur Symphony Orchestra is recognizing those melodies. Interesting? The music of the masters endures. Go hear for yourself. The Millikan Decatur Symphony season opening is September 23rd at Kirkland, the Romeo and Juliet Fantasy Overture. October 22nd, the music of John Williams, the Star Wars Suite, and Jurassic Park theme. And in November, the Moscow Ballet performs the Great Russian Nutcracker. Contact the Kirkland box office for your tickets. Get a 10% discount when you buy tickets for all three. The Millikan Decatur Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Dr. Sergei Bogza. You'll be pleased and amazed. Get your tickets soon.
11:22 now is our time. Thank you, Chris. You haven't lost it. It's been a long time since you were a radio performer, though.
Well, it has been a while since I've been out of the broadcasting business, but it was a business that I loved. Made a lot of friends in it. I mean, it's a great business.
Oh, it sure is. And you were in Seattle most of that time.
Most of the time, I was born in Sacramento, but have lived in Seattle for many years.
Yeah, okay. Well, Seattle is a very liberal town, and as you look at history, at all of these invasions and the societies at those times, you see liberals and you see conservatives.
Right.
Do you find that fascinating?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we live in a very politicized time. We're a country that's divided.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have, I think, this longing for unity. I mean, just recently, I think about what recently, there's a movie that came out called Dunkirk this summer. And that movie, people said, oh, well, that movie is just going to appeal to, 50-plus white guys. Mm-hmm. But what happened is that movie became a major hit. And when I went to the theater in Cinerama in Seattle, I had, a couple black kids sitting next to me. I had a woman next to me with her Asian boyfriend. I mean, to have a mega hit, you have to have a broader appeal than just, I'm not against old white guys, but nevertheless, there are other people out there. But this was a mega hit. And the thing about Dunkirk is it's a story about, usually it's the military is trying to rescue or defend their people. But in this case, this is a story about the people defending or coming to the rescue of their army. Uh-huh. And what I think about that is that, and what Dunkirk did is it united the British people. They weren't sure what was going on at the beginning of World War II, but Dunkirk made them become united in the same way that Pearl Harbor united the United States. Yeah. That we've never been more united as a people since Pearl Harbor, before or since, and Dunkirk. And I think there's a longing for that unity today, instead of the kind of divisiveness that we seem to see every day.
If we had another Pearl Harbor type event, would that unite us again?
It's a scary thought. I mean, that you're. I
Yeah.
mean, it's. I mean, you certainly don't. Nobody would want that. Wish that to happen. That to have unity at the cost of this some horrific event. But of course, something. I mean, the future is hard to tell. I mean, I'm better talking about the past than predicting the future. Of course.
Hold on. I want to ask you about statues in a moment, but I must do this commercial first. Be right back with author Chris Kelly.
Decatur Memorial Hospital celebrating 100 years of healthcare. It started with one woman's dream that there should be a hospital in Decatur where babies could be born. Mrs. Sue Hageman's dream became reality on New Year's Day 1916 when Decatur Memorial Hospital opened its doors. Just a few days later, DMH welcomed our first baby, and we've been growing ever since. 1916 to 2016, celebrating our first century of caring.
Writer Chris Kelly is my guest in the studio, writer of this book called America Invaded. This was not his first book. He and his co-author Stuart Laycock wrote America Invades earlier, talking about all the places American troops have fought overseas. And this book is about all of the wars, the battles of all kinds here in the United States, and separated by state, a chapter for each state. You want to know what happened in Indiana, you want to know what happened in Minnesota, you name it, it's all here, including Washington, D.C. You're treating it as a state for the purposes of the book.
That's right.
You said earlier that you spent the night last night in Decatur, and you found the Stephen Decatur statue and took a photograph of it. And that brought to mind the question, what about statues? There's so much, you talk about the disunity in the country these days and the people tearing down statues of various kinds. Do you have any feeling towards any of that?
Yeah, I do. I've had to think about that recently, of course, with recent events. I mean, I think that the three principles are that in terms of like the Civil War statues and the controversy of that is that one, I would say the first principle is that we shouldn't glorify slavery or the Confederacy. Two, the principle would be that it's important to remember history and to remember history, the good, the bad, and the ugly parts about it in some way. And then I guess the third principle would be that we should, whatever we do, should be done democratically and should be done at the local level without, I mean, it shouldn't be, outside authors or, say, the federal government telling people what they should do. It should be local communities acting responsibly in their own way to do whatever they wish to do about how they want to remember history. And then I guess the other final thing is just that we had 750,000 Americans were killed in the Civil War. I mean, the last thing, if you were pulling down a statue with a bungee cord in the dead of night illegally, it's an incredibly dangerous thing, and we certainly don't want to have Civil War casualties in the 21st century.
Interesting viewpoint.
It's extremely dangerous to pull down an equestrian statue of, I don't know, Robert E. Lee or whatever.
Now, you were talking about Stephen Decatur and his fight.
I was glad to see his statue standing.
Yeah, me too. Me too. But you were talking about his battle. Thomas Jefferson sent American troops. If I remember history correctly, and you know it better than I, but the story went that the Islamists, or the Muslims,
right,
demanded ransom of the United States to protect their merchant ships in the Mediterranean.
That's true. That after the American Revolution, we before, as 13 colonies, had been part of Britain, and so the British Navy had protected American merchant ships around the world. But when we were independent, we no longer had the protection of the Royal Navy, and there were pirates in the North Africa that preyed on that. And we didn't have a navy that was very substantial at that time that could defend American shipping. So for a while, we actually paid ransom, and it became very expensive. It was a big part of our budget.
And Thomas Jefferson was elected, and
right.
The ransom demand for $250,000 came to him, as I recall.
Right. They became these exorbitant demands, and we didn't have a a navy that was very effective. But Stephen Decatur was part of that, fledgling American Navy, and he was sent over to fight against the Barbary pirates in North Africa, and he was successful. I mean, there were other incidents as well. There was the fighting in Libya and Tripoli, and where the Marines were famously involved from the shores of Tripoli in their song.
Sure.
So yes, ultimately, what our nation discovered is that yes, we needed a navy to protect our interests around the world, even though we weren't, an imperial power like Britain.
Fascinating stories from history, and they're all in this book, America Invaded. My guest, Christopher Kelly, one of the co-authors of this book. Chris, sign this book for me.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
And that one. We're going to give this away after a while. Great. And you must be accustomed to signing these books because you've been to bookstores all over.
Yes, we're at bookstores all over. We're getting into Barnes & Noble. We're on Amazon. And we also have on our own website, AmericaInvaded.com. I have signed copies. I've signed hundreds of copies that are shipping from our warehouse in Redmond, Oregon as well.
And you'll be signing books this afternoon in Peoria, East Peoria, actually, at what's the name of the bookstore?
It's called I Know You Like a Book in Peoria Heights.
Peoria Heights. Okay.
Yes. And so we would love to see any of your listeners and out there and to answer questions they may have.
Fascinating. Chris, thank you. Thank you once again. I appreciate you so much. Should say that Chris walked in the studio this morning with a bottle of Bombshell Red Vineyard Salute from Yakima Valley.
That's right, from my own home state of Washington.